Hi, Sophie Lukacs, Kora player. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Leah. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm so glad you agreed to play for us and show us all about the Kora. So can you play something first, and then later on we'll talk about how the instrument works?
Yeah, sure. So this first piece is a traditional piece, and it's called Jula Jegere.
Okay, thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So not everyone, some people will be listening to the podcast format and they won't see what you're doing.
Okay,
So if you could describe a little bit what the instrument looks like and how you start.
sure. Um, so for the listeners of the podcast, I'll just talk a little bit about the instrument I'm playing. So Kora has 21 strings, and it's a diatonic, and we have on the bottom, so the closest to the person playing it, we have the C, and then alternating, and then the three on the top on the right. So and we're playing with our thumbs and our forefingers, and basically the left hand thumb is usually playing the accompaniment, and that is kind of going all the time, and also with the right thumb, which has like a little bit more liberty, and then you're playing the melody and improvising on top. So the song you just heard, obviously the so that's always going, and those are the thumbs that are playing that. Um, so when you're starting out to learn, I guess the difficulty is the melodies are quite simple in the traditional pieces. You can catch those fairly simply with your forefingers, but then integrating that with the thumbs that that are going all the time is a little bit more tricky. And then the next level is, of course, is improvisation, which has a huge role in the tradition of choir players, and that's yeah, that's a little bit a little bit tricky. That takes a little bit longer to learn.
So to follow up with the construction of the instrument, it's sort of a cross between a lute and a harp, would you say?
Yes, I mean it's like historically and in ethnomusicology, it's written as a harp lute. It's a kind of African harp lute that dates back a little bit longer. It's from the 13th century.
Could you hold up the body so we can see?
Yes.
Beautiful.
This is a calabash, and I have my mic. This is heavy. I have my mic there on the bridge, and yeah, it's every Kora is unique. Obviously, the size of the calabash, they used to be much larger, which produces a much nicer sound. But as things evolved, like we're traveling with them, it's difficult to carry them on planes and with the huge calabashes, so they've become smaller. And there's even like little mini ones which sound kind of terrible because like they don't resonate. And the neck, traditionally they were leather rings for tuning, and I guess in the past like 30 years they started switching to guitar keys, tuning keys. The leather strings were incredibly difficult to tune. Can you imagine with 21 strings? Yeah. So you would try, you were trying to tune one up, and then they would like all slide, or one would slide, and you would spend hours. That's how I was initiated into, into my core studies. And then, no, I'm sorry, I don't have the strength. It was also very like physical to move the leather. Yeah,
I had heard that tourists would go to West Africa, hear the Kora, love it, buy it one, and then not be able to tune it when they got home.
I'm sure.
That would just be decorative.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, with the leather rings. I mean, yeah, it was very difficult, especially also, not to talk of when the strings break with the leather strings, with the traditional leather rings, to change that. I mean, it's a whole process. You like stick this, this sharp object to, get some space, and then the whole, kind of the whole thing. It's quite complicated. But a lot of Kora players in Mali now use keys.
So you just recorded, and it'll be coming out soon, your first solo album.
Yes, my first. Yes, it was a long time in the coming. I studied in Mali for 6 years, and I guess I started working on the album about 2 years ago. And it's their original compositions. I guess influenced by obviously the Malian music and the traditional music, but also classical music that I grew up in. And I think it's a using the Kora in a very different way. It's I think the hardest thing about finding my voice with the Kora was that it's an instrument that is so rooted in the tradition, and unlike the the piano or the guitar or even the violin, it's we're accustomed to it being used in many different genres, and the Kora is still very much in the tradition, and so kind of taking it out of its tradition and trying to find my own sound was very difficult. But I think I succeeded, and I recorded it in Mali with some really amazing musicians, and I'm really excited to share it with everyone.
Congratulations. And can you give us a taste of some of those tunes?
Yes, of course. So this song is called Before You. Normally it would be played with a bass, calabash, and Jeli Ngoni, which is like the banjo predecessor. So if you've seen like Bela Fleck's film,
I did.
Yeah. So okay. Before there was you, I was pretty fine. I kept to myself. My heart was just mine. I could be alone by myself. I wasn't really only alone. Now I'm blue, I'm lonely with you. Now I'm blue, I'm lonely without you. Can you stay the night, stay a while? Can you carry me, all my love? Can you stay a while, for a life? You don't really know, you should know, please just know. Before there was you, I was pretty free. No one to teach me, love couldn't reach me. Now there's more pleasure with you, there's more pain from loving you. Now I'm blue, I'm lonely with you. Now I'm blue, I'm lonely without you. Can you stay the night, stay a while? Can you carry me, all my love? Can you stay a while, for a life? You don't really know, you should know, please just go. Can you stay the night, stay a while? Can you carry me, all my love? Can you stay a while, for a life? You don't really know, you should know, please just go. La 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 la. Can you carry me, all my love? Can you carry me for a life, for a while? Can you carry me for a life, for a while? La 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 la.
Beautiful. You have a lovely voice.
Thank you.
Did you do much singing before you started doing songwriting?
Well, I guess when I started the violin quite young, I was doing a lot of like Orff and like Kodai, and so
Okay.
there was singing involved. But I didn't, and then I played the guitar when I was kind of 11, 12, 13, so I was singing. But I only started, I think, working seriously on it about 4 years ago, and studying with different coaches and teachers. Yeah, I think as an instrumentalist, especially with the violin, and then this, it wasn't like a natural transition. I always really wanted to write songs and be a singer songwriter, but yeah, it was definitely, it was challenging. I think with the violin, as an instrumentalist, like you can kind of hide behind the instrument sometimes, or anyway, I was. And so with singing, it was really kind of making myself a lot more vulnerable, and with the songs I was writing too. So that was challenging, but also like amazing as well, because it was kind of the goal.
So when you first heard the Kora the first time live, had you heard it before in records, or were you aware of it?
So yeah, so my story goes back to 2008 actually, and I was in Burkina Faso. I was studying at McGill University. I was not really sure what I wanted to do or study, or I was a little bit searching, and I was doing a program in like international development, and I had gone to Burkina Faso for a few months, and that's I heard the Kora there, and I was introduced to so many like amazing Malian musicians. And I became kind of obsessed with the Kora, and I wanted to start playing, but it didn't really seem like realistic, and I think I also didn't have the courage. I wasn't ready, and few years went by. I was studying to become a doctor, and I wasn't really enjoying it. I thought that's what I wanted to do, and I was living in New York at the time, and I was kind of seeing the Kora everywhere, and I thought, or maybe it wasn't everywhere. My dad was asking me about this the other day. I think it was just like I saw it twice, and I was like, "This is a sign. I need a lesson." There was a concert at the Met Museum, and it was a player from Mali, Yakuba Sissoko, and I went up to him and I said, I need a lesson," and that was in 2013.
Mhm.
And I remember the first time I held the Kora, it was in his apartment in Harlem, and after that, I kind of knew right away, like I needed to play this instrument, and I think I probably needed to play music again, because I had decided not to play the violin or continue playing professionally, and so I think this was my way back to music, and I mean what a way back to music. Um, so after that, I spent 1 year trying to take lessons in New York. I didn't have a Kora. I remember I lived in Brooklyn, and the teacher lived in the Bronx, and we would meet like in the middle in the city. I was like carrying the Kora around. Um, I didn't have a case or anything. I was just kind of lugging this huge Kora around, and
Where, excuse me, where would you meet? Like in a park, or I mean,
literally we would meet. We would meet in the park. Once we met in Central Park, and then we met in the like in Alphabet City. We would just meet in the park. That was, like kind of in the middle.
mhm.
Um, and then I knew pretty quickly that I really needed to go back to West Africa,
Mhm.
but I was a little I knew right away that this was it, but I had a little bit of trouble accepting that, because my parents thought I kind of lost my mind. I was going to be a doctor, and now I'm kind of playing the Kora, or what even is this instrument. They were a little bit worried, and I was too. I didn't really trust myself, I think, or have the courage to make this kind of decision. So I was kind of kind of moving, treading carefully, and then Tumani Jabate, he gave a master class in Paris, and my mom said, you have to go. It's Tumani, and by that point I had I think I knew every single one of his notes. I had listened so much to the repertoire, um, and so I went, and he invited me to Mali, and and that was it. It was kind of a no-brainer. And so I went, and that was September 2015.
Really, you talked about bravery. You're so brave to do something like that. And when I was looking, I was actually interested in interviewing a Kora player because I had some Kora albums and I've always loved that sound. And on this series, I like to talk to all kinds of different musicians. But when I saw your story and that you used to be a violinist and that you didn't grow up with this music of West Africa and you really immersed yourself and you learned Bambara as well, the language that's spoken in Mali. How is that said? Did I say that wrong?
Yeah, no, it's right. Yeah, it's actually in Bambara. It's Bamananka.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, we say Bambara. Yeah, no, you said it perfect.
So that must have been incredible as well. I mean, it's completely different language group from your other languages.
Yeah, I yeah, the language was really hard. I'm pretty good with languages. I picked them up quite quickly, but Bambara was very difficult. I think, I obviously had no references. Um, and yeah, I guess the fact that I had, quite a solid foundation in music and classical music, um, well, it was kind of a double-edged sword. I thought that I would learn the Kora very quickly.
Hmm.
I thought, you know, if you play playing the violin, you learn quite complicated pieces. You memorize it, So in comparison, the mundane melodies seem quite simple.
Hmm.
But this is very deceiving, of course, because to play any instrument well takes a very long time, and the kora, is its own kind of beast, or its own, like every instrument has its own um, kind of
Special challenges.
yeah, yeah. And I, of course, completely um, underestimated how challenging it would be. Not only was I learning a new instrument, a new musical culture with completely different like idioms and everything, I was living in a completely different environment. So it was it was like everything you knew. Okay, you kind of put that aside because it's not, you can't really use it here. And um, in hindsight, it was an incredible experience, and um, which taught me so much. I thought I was going to learn about the core, but really, it was really changed my life. Um, but yeah, it was very challenging. Just kind of the physical climate or the geographical climate in and of itself in Mali. It's the sub-Saharan desert. It's very very hot and yeah. So we were kind of all like the physical ailments of the typhoid and malaria and all of that in the beginning. It was kind of nonstop, and then the challenge of trying to learn an instrument which doesn't the pedagogy is completely different from classical music. So here, you kind of go through the school, or you do the Suzuki, you do the grades 1 to 10, and there are teachers, and everything is there. There's not really kind of this like air of secrecy, or that it's anybody can learn to study the violin. And with the kora, because I think, well, it's quite complex, but it's there are no partitions. It's all oral. So especially in the beginning, you need teachers. You really need teachers to pass on the knowledge and to show you the basics, and so yeah. There's no school. There's no conservatory. You just kind of have to immerse yourself in the milieu and kind of find the teachers who you like their style. They can they maybe have a good way of teaching. So it's all of this very informal um, kind of community that's you kind of have to figure it out yourself. And there was nobody who was nobody could really help me, because other people hadn't really done this intensive study, I think, in the Kora. So I think most people I know who play the Kora go for a few weeks and then return home. And I said, no, I want to learn it, like everything. I want to master it, and it's, so I treated it kind of as a conservatory. I'm going. It's going to be the Kora, only the Kora all the time, and so I think the advantages were I was completely immersed in it, and I learned how to speak Bambara, not fluently, but enough to get by, and but yeah, I mean yeah. So there were the advantages and the disadvantages. It was also incredibly isolating at times. Like, yeah. So.
And you were there during the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic as well.
Yeah. And so I was there I was there for a year last year, and that by now I have good friends, and it's very different from when I first arrived. And yeah, so it was quite different. But yeah, I was there this year, and I was mostly working on the album and doing other things. I teach a lot. I teach like Pilates and do lots of other stuff. Yeah. And,
are you teaching the Kora as well?
I have, yeah, I have some students, some women students, a little bit all over the world, and they're, yeah, I've had Malian students who come sometimes to the house, or yeah, so that's actually really nice. I really love teaching. So yeah.
And let's talk about the violin. So that was your first instrument?
Yes, it was my first instrument. I was 3, 4, and yeah, I mean, I grew up in a very musical family. We have a lot of musicians in Budapest, and my mom took me to see a lot of music, a lot of classical music, and I saw this incredible Hungarian folk band called Muzsikás. And if anyone is listening, they should look them up. They're probably the best Hungarian folk group. They're incredible, and they were playing in Toronto at the Ashkenazi Music Festival, and they were. I mean, and I told my mom, I want to do what that guy's doing. It looked, so fun. Of course, then the classical repertoire was not always as much fun as how much they made it look. But yeah, so I started studying classical and played in like a lot of orchestras up until Miguel. I played in an orchestra there as well, and then I took a few years break from music. Although I guess I never really left. Never really left music, and yeah.
Were you playing violin in different styles when you were like a teenager?
So it was mostly classical, and then a little bit of like Celtic, in the summers at camps, at music camps.
But not Hungarian music at all?
That came later on. No, it was really like kind of pure classical, and then later, I guess later on when I started playing the Kora was when, I mean, I guess this sounds kind of ridiculous to some people, but it was probably when I first realized that I could improvise on the violin and I didn't need to just play classical music. And for me, this was like, wow, this was a revelation. And so I started playing. I started learning a lot of the Hungarian folk music, and when I first started playing the choir, when I was first in Mali, I was playing the violin, but then I kind of put it aside because I really wanted to concentrate on the choir. Yeah, but I hope to start playing the violin again. I would like. I mean, not I hope. I would like to, but at some point, yeah.
Sophie, do you think that because you were learning by ear so much your time in Mali, that when you went back to the violin, it was easier to just trust that you could play by ear?
Yes, I think it was also, I think that's part of it, but I think when I even before I went to Mali, I remember I took my violin out and I was playing along with like Ali Farka Touré, who's legendary Malian guitarist. I think it was also like rediscovering the incredible joy of music, and that I had maybe, lost that a little bit with the violin, thinking, I had to play classical music, and if it wasn't, good enough, then I couldn't play the violin, and so I think, in many ways, the Kora and the way I learned it and the way they learned it, it was so different, so kind of opposite to the way I studied classical music. It was really liberating, and yeah. No, I just remember I'd been in Mali for a few years, and I was playing a concert with this incredible balafon player, um, who actually tours with the Kronos Quartet. He's part of a trio of Mali musicians who play with the Kronos Quartet, and it's an amazing collaboration. And we were playing, and in Mali, in often you're playing, you take turns soloing, improvising. And he was like, okay, Sophie, like, vas-y. And I was like, no. And I think I started playing a solo of like Tumani, or, one that I had memorized. And he was like, no. He's like, joue. And I was like, no, I can't. It's not, and that was kind of a breaking point for me, where I realized, okay, it's now or never. I have to let go of these ideas of, perfection and playing these kind of composed melodies. You really have to improvise, and that was incredibly freeing as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So a balafon is with mallets.
Yes, yeah, wooden, like, I guess kind of like the xylophone. I got as old as the Kora, and they pentatonic, but also diatonic, like the really huge ones. I think they're two rows. Yeah, originated in Guinea, also now played in Mali. Yeah.
Is that instrument featured in? You mentioned the Bela Fleck movie, "Throw Down Your Heart." Was that the instrument featured in there, where the whole village puts together this huge instrument, and it's in two rows that I remember?
I can't remember. I watched it quite a long time ago, but I can send the link, and maybe we can post it. Maybe
Yeah.
the album with Kronos is a really nice introduction.
Yeah.
Kind of a bridge between classical. Yeah.
So in terms of violin, why do you think you didn't pursue violin professionally?
Oh my God, biggest regret of my life. You know what? I mean, to be perfectly honest, I was not mature enough when I was like youth, and I really loved music, but I mean, the real answer is a bit longer. I don't know if it's. I think so. I think if we had stayed in Budapest, I would be a violinist. When we we emigrated to Toronto, and I I felt a little bit as an outsider, at my school and community where I grew up. There weren't a lot of people who played music at school, and it wasn't really considered like cool. And I loved orchestra on the weekends. It was like really my favorite, part of the week. But I think I was so kind of influenced by my peers, and I really wanted to fit in, and so I wasn't really able to embrace classical music or music. I think I loved it, and I was, I think I had a really good ear, and my mom saw that, and she really kind of fostered and encouraged that. But it wasn't enough. It has to it has to come from you, and I think I wasn't ready. So it was during university when I think I really really started to dive into music, and really kind of listen and have the patience to really hear it. I think I was a little bit too busy worrying about what other people were thinking of me to be able to be a musician at that point.
Mm-hmm.
That's the truth. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kept it a secret. Like no one, I don't think people really knew in high school that I played violin. Like it was,
Really? Yeah.
I understand completely.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's very lonely, right? The hours you have to put in. And
Yeah.
there's this
Yeah.
uncertainty about the future if you're following this path to be a classical violinist, that it's very
Yeah.
competitive and
Yeah. I mean, I think I didn't even really get to that. I was kind of like, yeah, I had my teacher when I was 10. She was like, she's so talented. She really, she could go to Jula. And I think my mom was like, wow. But for me, I was like, I'm like a soccer player, and I'm more interested in being popular, and which is, that's really kind of how it was at that age. And yeah, I used to have a lot of regret about it, but I found my way back to music, and
it's a big
so
way. Yeah.
uh,
I think like so many choices in life, you're always giving, every time you accept something, you're giving something up at every turn that we take in our lives.
yeah, 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 absolutely. And yeah, I think yeah, if you're happy with where you are, in, in your life, the regrets don't really serve any purpose. And so I'm going to play a song called "Falling," and that is. Used to be afraid of love, preferred the quiet of the dawn. I could keep bang white, didn't have to face the morning light. Took a chance on love with you, knew you had your demons too, and you showed me that was room for two. I am falling, falling in love. Do you know, really know what you've done to me? 'Cause I am falling for you. If you knew what I heard and the way I do, if you knew, would you let me fall without you? Seems like we're being tested too many days apart. Love on trial, I ain't for the faint of heart. I know I've hurt you, but love is forgiveness too. Never mind, someone like you, wanna hold you close. But what you need most is space to grow in solitude. Who am I to intrude? I am falling, falling in love. Do you know, really know what you've done to me? 'Cause I am falling for you. If you knew what I heard and the way I do, if you knew, would you let me fall without you? falling in love. Do you know, really know what you've done to me? 'Cause I am falling for you. If you knew what I heard and why I do, if you knew, would you let me fall without you? If you knew, would you fall with me too?
Lovely, thank you. These seem like very personal songs. Do you want to speak to some of that or not?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, I think art is always personal most of the time, and anyway, my process of writing music is, and yeah, yeah, I don't know that there were songs that are, I think, like universal in their pain or in their beauty, and I think there's a reason why like 95% of songs are written about love. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah.
So back in Montreal, you're playing some gigs. What's the scene like for West African music and collaborations?
Oh, this is a really good question because it's what I'm trying to figure out right now. And also, yeah, just also with my music. I used to believe that I had to play with West African musicians if I'm playing the Kora, and I guess it's been a journey and it's evolved. Like I I believe that less. I I I think also the more confidence I have as a musician, I think I'm less stuck in these like paradigms. Like, well, if I'm playing the kora, I need to be playing with a Malian or a Senegalese. Of course, it's great. I love playing in Mali, but when I'm here, I think the music needs to evolve and like cross barriers, and so I play with a lot of different musicians, and I'm trying to kind of figure out the formula for my group and how to show the album in Canada. And right now it's with a Cuban and a Hungarian Cuban percussionist and a Hungarian cellist.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean there are lots of wonderful musicians here, and the like kind of world music scene and is pretty strong, and there are some great musicians from Senegal and Mali, but I'm also interested in like exchange and like collaborative um, process, and I think that can come from anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautifully expressed, Sophie. Well, I want to thank you so much for this conversation today and playing for us. Would you have any final words of advice for like a young person who is kind of on the path that you were on at a crossroads, trying to, find something completely different musical?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess it sounds a little bit cliche, but like just listen to your intuition or your gut. If you feel strongly connected to an instrument or a type of music, then you should pursue it, and don't worry too much about how how it's going to work out. And I think art art cannot really like thrive with all those like kind of like limits or they meet, and you just have yeah, I think you have to keep doing it and keep playing and keep searching and that sounds like terrible advice, but trust your just I think keep coming back to why you started to play music, or why you're connected to the music, and it should work out.
That's great advice. Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you so much.